If this story touched your heart and you love animals, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In February 2024, winter in Westfield, Minnesota was relentless. The cold had arrived early and stayed with a quiet brutality that coated everything in frost. Lakes across the region froze under thick crusts of ice, deceptively still on the surface, while swift, black currents flowed far beneath. One of them was Black Pine Lake, wide, remote, bordered by pine trees that creaked under snow. That morning, just after dawn, Brian, a retired firefighter and weekend angler, trudged onto the lake with a sled and ice auger in tow. He had done this countless times. The air was dry and bitter. The silence stretched in all directions. But something felt wrong. As he approached the middle of the lake, he saw them, broken edges near the northern rim of the ice sheet. Uneven, unnatural. He slowed, his boots crunching over snow-crusted ice. There were prints. Paw prints. Not fresh, but distinct enough. They trailed toward the jagged opening and disappeared. He knelt down, peering into the ice. Beneath the frosty surface, there was a dark shape, barely visible through a web of cracks and frozen fog. It was a dog, still, motionless, caught under the clear ice, as though asleep. Her fur, thick and silvery, fanned around her body like wind-stirred grass, frozen mid-motion. Her eyes were closed. No bubbles, no movement, no sign of life, just silence pressing in from all sides. Brian sat back on his heels. Logic told him she was gone. The night had been bitter, colder than anything this season. No animal could survive long in water like that. But then again, he had seen stranger things in his years of rescue. Bodies that came back, heartbeats found when none were expected, and something in him refused to walk away. He unpacked his gear, set his jaw, and began chipping at the ice. The cold bit into his fingers through his gloves, but he didn't stop. The axe echoed through the stillness, ringing sharp against the surface. Bit by bit, the ice gave way. It took nearly half an hour to reach her, and when he finally pulled her out, she was limp and heavy, her fur soaked, eyes still closed. She didn't breathe. He laid her on the snow, wrapped her in his emergency blanket, and whispered something. Not a prayer exactly, but a plea. Not yet. Please, not yet. Because some part of him, the part that had once run toward burning buildings and dragged strangers from wreckage, believed in trying, even when no one else would. Let me know if you'd like the next chapter. The rescue team arrived within 30 minutes. The ice had thickened again in the bitter cold, and it took shovels and boot heels to chip away what Brian had already broken. They worked quickly but carefully, knowing that in cold water rescues, even seconds could mean everything, or nothing. When they finally hauled the body out, silence followed. It was a husky, large, coated in thick silver-gray fur, now matted with ice. Her eyelashes were crusted white, her whiskers frozen into delicate threads of frost. Her body was heavy, stiff, the weight of something that had already left. She wasn't breathing. They laid her gently on a woolen blanket, away from the wind, and began. Chest compressions. Short, firm. One rescuer focused on the heart, another on warming the limbs. They poured tepid water along her stomach and inner thighs, trying to coax circulation back into tissues already turning stone cold. Her gums were pale. Her limbs did not twitch. Someone muttered that it was too late. The thermometer couldn't register a temperature. It flashed LO and beeped, as if to confirm what the eyes could already see. But one medic, Julie, kept going. She was in her early 40s, calm, practical, and had seen enough emergencies to know that death didn't always arrive when it was expected. She moved with quiet urgency, pressing her hands along the dog's ribs in rhythm, counting under her breath. Minutes stretched. Snow fell again, light and dry, collecting silently around them. Julie leaned in, her ear close to the husky's muzzle. Nothing. And then, the faintest flutter. A blink. Her eyelid moved. Julie froze, eyes wide. She stared, unsure at first if it had been wind or wishful thinking. But then it happened again. A weak, twitching blink, like the flicker of a candle struggling against wind. She blinked, she said, though no one had spoken. Everything shifted. Blankets were pulled tighter. A portable heating pad was unrolled. One rescuer removed his jacket, wrapped it around her chest. Another fetched more warm water. The silence was replaced by purpose. The husky's body didn't stir beyond that one flicker, but something inside her had held on. Some spark, buried, hidden but real, had waited for warmth, for hands, for breath. She wasn't gone, not yet. They wrapped her in an electric blanket, still soaked beneath her thick fur, and carried her into the back of the rescue truck. Her body remained limp, her eyes closed, but the faintest trace of warmth began to seep beneath her skin. The vehicle jolted through icy roads, and with every bump, Julie kept one hand on the husky's ribs, silently counting seconds. She didn't speak, didn't allow hope, but she didn't stop watching. At the clinic, a small veterinary outpost on the edge of Westfield, the team was already waiting. No gurney, just hands. They lifted the dog gently, placed her on a heated surface under bright lights, and got to work. A catheter was inserted. Warm fluids began to drip slowly into her veins. Heating lamps surrounded her. Towels, soaked in hot water, were layered over her paws and ears. The veterinarian, Dr. Marcus Lang, checked her pupils, her reflexes. He frowned, murmured about odds. Hypothermia this deep, this long, often meant brain death. But then he stopped, tilted her head gently in his hands, and whispered something only the staff closest could hear. She blinked. That's brainstem. That's something. They gave her a name on the intake form, Evie. Not after the Pokemon, but the root word from revive. A joke made softly, hopefully. No one laughed, but no one changed it either. The room grew quiet again. The IV bag emptied, replaced. The digital monitor beeped, slow and steady, a sound that felt too fragile to trust. Her heartbeat was there, irregular, faint, but real. It dipped sometimes, vanishing for long stretches, then returned as if deciding to stay a bit longer. Dr. Lang sat beside her long after closing hours. Nurses moved quietly around the room, whispering updates, adjusting wires. Snow began to fall again outside the window, thick and windless. Just before dawn, something shifted. Her tail moved. Not a wag, not even a twitch, but a slow, small drag across the blanket, like a signal from some place between sleep and life. The room stilled. One nurse stepped closer. Dr. Lang leaned in. On the screen, the heart rate monitor steadied. 39 beats per minute. 40. 43. The warmth had found her. And deep inside, like a coal buried beneath ash, something in Evie had chosen to glow again. A week passed. The clinic's rhythm adjusted to accommodate a new presence. Quiet, immobile at first, but unmistakably alive. Evie began to twitch her paws, subtle at first, barely more than a ripple beneath the blanket. Her eyes opened more often now. She still didn't eat, but she followed movement with her gaze. When the lights dimmed at night, her pupils widened. When footsteps echoed in the hallway, her ears turned toward them. The staff rotated shifts, and volunteers from the town came daily. Some brought cans of food, though Evie only sniffed them. Others left blankets, soft, colorful things sewn by local kids. Someone donated a squeaky toy shaped like a fox, which she didn't play with but didn't push away either. But it was Julie who made the difference. Every evening, when her shift at the emergency station ended, Julie came. Sometimes in uniform, sometimes in heavy coats flecked with snow. She never asked for updates. She just walked in, pulled a chair close, and opened a book. She read children's stories, old poetry, even the local newspaper aloud. Her voice was calm, steady, grounding. At first, Evie just blinked, but slowly, something deeper began to show. Her breathing slowed when Julie read. Her ears perked slightly more. Sometimes she tried to raise her head when the reading stopped, as if unwilling to let the sound fade too quickly. The other staff noticed. They called it the Julie effect. No one joked about miracles, but no one dismissed them either. It was as if Evie had found an anchor in the world she'd barely survived re-entering. In her gaze, there was no panic, no confusion, only quiet awareness, like she understood what had happened but didn't need to dwell on it. Her eyes held weight, not fear, but memory, as if she had seen the edge of something vast and cold, and chosen somehow to turn back. Julie started talking to her more casually, even when not reading. She told her about town gossip, the weather, the pie she'd burned the night before. Evie listened, not like a dog eager for praise, but like an old soul finally allowed to rest. The nights remained long, and her body remained fragile, but the light in her eyes grew steadier, like embers shielded from the wind. She still didn't bark, didn't whine, but when Julie entered the room, her tail lifted just slightly from the blanket, enough to say, "I'm still here." By the time the snow melted and the mud returned to the fields around Westfield, Evie had learned to stand again. It wasn't graceful. Her legs wobbled, her steps were cautious, often ending in collapse on the padded mats laid out in the clinic. But she stood. Then she moved. Then, slowly, she walked. Each motion came with a quiet determination. Her muscles remembered pain, but her eyes showed only resilience. The veterinary team adjusted their schedules to match her rhythms. She ate small meals, tolerated baths, endured the physical therapy sessions that made her whimper but never bite. The frostbite left marks on her paws and ears, but no lasting damage. Her heart was strong. Her lungs, once frozen still, were now filled with the breath of a creature that had no intention of giving up. Word spread about the dog from under the ice. People called. They sent letters, photos of fenced yards and sunlit porches. A retired couple offered a cottage by a lake. A family from Minneapolis promised daily hikes and a house full of children. The shelter's board reviewed every application with care, touched by the hope in each one. But when Julie entered the room, Evie's body reacted before her mind had time to think. Her tail thumped against the floor. Her body pushed forward. And the moment Julie knelt, Evie walked, unsteady but focused, straight into her lap. It wasn't just affection. It was a decision. She pressed her face into Julie's coat, nuzzling at her stomach like a pup greeting a mother after too long apart. Julie sat frozen for a moment, her hand hovering. Then she lowered it, gently placed it on the dog's back, and felt the steady warmth of trust radiating upward. No application was processed after that. Julie was no stranger to emergency calls and late-night loneliness. Her house had been quiet for too long. She worked too much, slept too little. She always said she couldn't take care of anything more than the patients on her stretchers and the charts in her bag. But this time, she didn't argue with herself. She brought Evie home 2 weeks later. The house was small, with creaky steps and a narrow hallway that echoed with every footstep. Julie laid out a thick bed in the corner of the living room, right next to the heating vent. Evie ignored it. That first night, she curled up beside the couch, where Julie sat reading, her breathing syncing with the turning of pages. In the mornings, they walked. Slow at first, then longer. Down the old gravel road, through the thawed fields, into the edge of the woods where new green pushed through last year's decay. Evie didn't chase birds. She didn't bark at deer. She walked calmly, one step behind Julie, her nose lifted to the wind as if remembering the lake, the ice, the moment it all went black, and the warmth that had pulled her back. Spring in Westfield came with muddy boots, cold rains, and skies that couldn't decide between snow and sun. But in one quiet house, it came with something steadier, a dog who had seen death, and a woman who stayed. In July, the air around Westfield had softened into warmth. The fields were high with grass, The forests hummed with insects, and the lakes, once cruel sheets of ice, now mirrored the sky with lazy, sun-streaked ripples. Julie drove with the windows down. Evie sat in the passenger seat, her head just high enough to catch the wind. She no longer limped. The pink scars on her paws had faded beneath the regrown fur, and her eyes held a clarity that only came with survival, not the kind won by chance, but earned in silence. They returned to Black Pine Lake. The path down was the same, steep in places, familiar in the way a place becomes once it has nearly taken something from you. Julie parked at the edge of the trees and walked with Evie down to the waterline. No leash, no command, just shared steps and the sound of wind threading through pine. The lake shimmered. It was hard to imagine it as it had been that day in February, frozen, cruel, and quiet. Now it lapped gently at the rocks, a mild voice that betrayed no memory. But Evie remembered. She walked to the edge, paws brushing the wet stone, and stopped. Julie stood beside her. There were no people on the beach, no boats on the water. Just the two of them, the lake, and the memory of cold that still lived beneath the sun-warmed surface. Evie looked out. She didn't shiver. She didn't whine. She simply stood still, her tail low, her gaze fixed on the place where the ice had once swallowed her whole. And then she lay down in the grass, not because she was tired, because she had chosen. Julie sat beside her. She didn't say anything. There was nothing that words could give this moment that silence hadn't already offered. For a while, they just listened. The lapping water, the breeze weaving between reeds, the quiet rustle of summer settling around them. Evie closed her eyes. Julie watched her, one hand resting lightly on the thick fur that had once been wet and freezing, now warm and alive beneath her fingers. Some stories don't begin with words. They begin with a blink, a movement so small it could have been missed by anyone who had already given up. And with warmth, not the kind from a heater or blanket, but the kind given freely, because to walk away would be unbearable. They stayed until the sun bent low, and then they walked home. Not as a rescuer and the rescued, but as two beings who had met where it was cold and chose to return, together, where it was warm.